You're being recorded, so watch what you say.
Mari, not Mary, Mari.
Oh.
I want to make sure I get it right.
Okay, hi everyone. Thanks for coming. This is our continued conversation about gen ed reform. For those of you who are new, we are currently thinking about, embroiled in, embroiled's not the right word, but looking at our general and liberal education program here at Franklin Pierce to make some changes to it. We've all sort of, consensus seems to be that it needs to be changed. It's about 10, we've been doing the program that we have for about 12 years now, so it's time to revisit. And I have been tasked with coordinating those efforts. I am also the chair of the General and Liberal Education Committee. There are some members of that committee in here. Where are you? Just Tom? Okay, well, just Tom. Sorry?
I'll be helpful and not obstructive.
You'll be helpful and not obstructive? Okay, good, that's good. Maybe, yeah, yeah, okay. But we are in certainly at the beginning stages of this and gathering information and ideas. And I just kind of want to update you on the summer progress, and I use progress relatively loosely. I spent my time doing a lot of background reading and figuring out what this process might look like, whether or what is involved in that process of what we will be sort of voting on as a faculty is still very much up in the air. And that's what this semester I'm hoping to kind of nail down. And I do have some ideas that have emerged from the workshop we did in the spring. There were a lot of good ideas I thought that were generated there. We started a good conversation, but I just also want to emphasize that this process really is, I really want it to be coming from all of you and not kind of top-down thing and not even a GLE thing necessarily. GLE is here to drive the vehicle that you provide for us, right? So I did invite Provost Payton here.
I was invited.
She was invited.
I'm not imposing myself.
I don't think we're going to be talking about anything too controversial. If we are,
I can
say.
yeah.
But we have been meeting regularly, about every 2 to 3 weeks over the summer and last spring as well. So she knows kind of where things stand. So just to kick off, I can't even do it. There we go. Sorry, I'm not used to it. All right. Okay, so just a quick note, there is a GLE Canvas page. Those new faculty members, I'm looking at your faces and I'm like, no, I did not invite them. I will invite you to be a student in that course on Canvas. That contains information that I have been, again, gathering over the summer. Notes and trends from the May meeting are in there. I kind of, brought everybody's ideas together in that. There is GLE information for those of you who are new, information about who's on GLE, the process of proposing a course for GLE under our current parameters, right? That kind of information. I did work with Anne Goodrich-Pazan this summer a little bit at the suggestion, those of you, the LinkedIn Learning that we've subscribed to over the summer. In talks with Catherine, we decided that maybe gen ed is a place that those things, connections can be made between courses and the resources on LinkedIn Learning. So if you were in Anne's session the other day, you saw the insane content mapping document that she showed. I did not use that in this. This was just me kind of going by learning outcomes that are current learning outcomes associated with gen ed and kind of finding some courses that might be useful for those learning outcomes. Now, again, it's sparse because I don't know, has anyone been on it yet? LinkedIn Learning, have you poked around on it? The amount of content is insane, like insane. So I did what I could with some of them. Some of those learning outcomes don't kind of map as easily as others. So there are some holes there, but again, they're very much suggestions and very much just to kind of get you thinking about what might be useful for you, right? So there's a link to that. And then I also linked some other things. One is other colleges' programs that I think are, gen ed programs that I think are innovative or interesting or have interesting elements to them. Right now, that's really only 4 or 5 on there. I included Westchester University, which has an insanely informative page about their reform process and what that looked like. And kind of where they came out the other end on that. And they have various, it's just really, I don't know if you're interested in these things. Elon University, which is kind of my touchstone for like everything. I don't know if you guys have ever looked at anything from Elon. My sister went to Elon and it was a really impressive experience. And since then, it's just sort of been whatever. So they have an interesting program that has gen ed requirements over all 4 years built in, which I think is really interesting as well. One of their things that they do, for example, is they have upper level gen ed requirements where they're taking 300 and 400 level classes that are required within their gen ed. Bryant University, which is something that we've talked about quite a bit in LEC, because we had discussed options about potentially thinking about how minors could play into general education here. Now, Bryant's are a little different. I like the idea. Operationally, it doesn't really kind of translate to us. So what they do at Bryant is if you are a student in the College of Business, you have to minor in something in either their equivalent to College of Liberal Arts or their equivalent to their College of Science, right? So it's to diversify their education. That's in addition to some foundational courses they have within their gen ed programs as well. We did express interest in this, right? Because we do have such a heavy focus right now on health sciences in particular, right? And thinking about how to diversify those students a little bit. But again, like right now, for example, psychology lives in class, right? There are a lot of health science majors that minor in psych. So that would sort of be a very easy, right? And the idea would be to push them further from those boundaries. So again, it's an interesting idea. And then there's one more, now I can't think of what it is. Oh, WPI. And I put WPI on there because they have a first year seminar that's project based. And focus a lot on, and Elon does this too, on experiential learning as part of their gen ed. So it's about teamwork and problem solving and that kind of thing. So if you're interested, all of that is there on that Canvas page. And I'm adding to that sort of constantly, so. Okay, so our agenda today is really about summer progress. I want to talk a little bit about GLE learning outcomes, and I'll come back to that in a second. Potential GLE program changes, this is the emerging ideas that have come up, right? And then I want to step back and think about the process for this semester and what those processes will be. And you see under that is paring down LOs. This is something that we, I think, as a faculty have come to a consensus on, that there are just too darn many, right? So my first attempt at paring these down and figuring out what these will be, you all will be receiving a survey with all of our current LOs, where I'm going to ask you to rank them, okay? From that ranking, the idea would be, let's see what emerges and that what we can kind of come to a consensus on. And Catherine and I have been talking to, various programs have various numbers of LOs attached to their gen ed programs. Also, the gen ed program review, which we did a few years ago, is also linked on that Canvas page. And you'll see Jean Dawson did a fantastic comparative study between us and some peer institutions. And you'll see on there, they range from, most of them are around 4 to 8 learning outcomes that are identified for their general education program. But there are others, there's one in there that's like 36, so at least we're not them, I can't remember who it is. I mean, that's what when we did that, I was like, well, at least we're not those people, right? So Provost Payton and I were talking just yesterday, and we were thinking about kind of what number maybe we hit on, and we were thinking around 6, hopefully. That's kind of what I'm thinking, but with a caveat here. Because I think there are 2 super foundational learning outcomes that we currently have that are essential. Anyone want to guess what those are?
Critical thinking.
Well, okay, yes. two that get taught in our foundations program that don't necessarily get taught other places. Quantitative literacy, right? The math requirement essentially, and the written communication, right? So those two we see in the composition program, right? Those two kind of seem like two of those six. So the idea is let's see what emerges. I'm hoping that kind of that's our check mark on that conversation. I'm happy if that doesn't end up the way we want it to, we can continue to talk about what those learning outcomes will be. Any thoughts on that process? Yeah, Lou.
Question. There's always been some sort of, I think, confusion about the relationship between learning outcomes and knowledge and understanding requirements.
Yep.
I wonder if there's going to be any way in which we might address that in this process. And I'm guessing when you're talking about learning outcomes, you're not talking about paring down the knowledge and understanding.
No.
requirements.
Not, at least not right now, right? And we'll talk about that in a second too, but I think you're referring to the idea that and I wasn't here during the last reform process, but that it sort of emerged that various areas of knowledge and understanding, like humanities kind of decided they wanted to own, reading, critical reading, for example, right? Is that what you're talking about?
I'm just talking about the general.
The general-
confusion. I mean, if somebody could explain the relationship between learning outcomes and knowledge and understanding outcomes, I dare you.
Yeah, I dare you too, because I don't know. Lindsay, go ahead.
The only GLE I've taught is FYI, and I am very confused at the end of this semester how to grade that stuff.
Oh, you mean the assessments?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think that seemed absurdly subjective and it just didn't hold enough weight for me to be able to determine what category I'm clicking.
This is a huge issue, and we talked a little bit about this, I think. LEC basically suspended the assessment process on Gen Ed. I don't know if you all noticed that. The last 2 semesters, we haven't sent anything out. And it was basically because we went through the cycle once. We're ambitious enough, knowing that as we went through the cycle of all the LOs in that process, it very quickly emerged that we had no idea what that data was doing, right? And why we were doing it, right? The point of doing it was just to do it, right? And then we step back and we're like, now what do we do with all of this? And is it working? And we kind of decided it wasn't. So when the reform idea came out, we pressed pause on those assessments for this reason, because I think that we're all in that boat.
And I'm just thinking as we move forward, if we are gonna have an assessment,
Yes.
maybe a different way to assess.
Yes. And that's 100% part of this process. I think that we need to nail down what our program is first before we decide how it's going to be assessed. But assessment is a big piece of this, and I don't know, Catherine, maybe you can speak to this. I know NETCHI kind of identified that as an area.
Yeah, they did in the last decennial review. So we've been addressing it. But yeah, it's something they keep their eye on for us.
Yeah, they said they're gonna keep their eye on for us, and well, they're gonna keep our eye on us for it. Sorry, I'm looking at the chat at the same time.
So what that means is every report, we have to speak to our assessment processes for Gen Ed.
And essentially what we talked about is kind of saying, hey, because of the assessment process and because it wasn't working, that was one of the factors that led to us thinking about reform in the first place. So assessment is on pause, right? And we think that will satisfy them because we're talking through it. Lisa?
I brought this up before. I don't know how you can assess if you don't have a pre and a post.
Yeah.
Like, how do you know whether or not you've made any headway?
Exactly. And we've talked about this plenty of times. Yeah, go ahead.
So Jenny actually raised her hand. She didn't
Yeah.
have something in chat,
Yeah.
so.
Thank you. Yeah, similar, I think, to what Lisa was arguing about or suggesting is that I think we need to think about assessment as we go through the process, because we don't want to develop something that's difficult or impossible to assess. So I think those two things need to go hand in hand.
Good.
I totally agree.
I agree. And that is one thing I do think, if you're interested in that stuff, that Westchester website, I'm not kidding, the amount of information on that website about what they did. I don't know who was in charge of it, but my gosh. They have some of that stuff on there about their process of coming to assessment as well. And that is definitely something I would like to benchmark as we move forward. And we did a little bit of this in GLEC, right? We started to benchmark what other assessment tools would be available. And you know, it all lives up here. I think, to be fair, the reading I've done, this is a struggle everywhere. This is not just us. Gen Ed assessment is something that, frustrates a lot of programs, I think, and also leads to a lot of conversations about the efficacy of people's gen ed programs, right? Mari?
Yeah, I'm just kind of wondering, if we could think about the collectively and not just, you know, today, but in the whole process. If we could think about the drivers for this, like, so, you know, there are many, there's a degree of frustration with what we have right now, you know, there's kind of a need to appeal to incoming students. What are we seeking to do? You know, are we seeking to be a little more cutting edge, or is the driver, you know, what we, the faculty, the administration think students should know? Like, you know, they're big questions, but I think they're important, because if we don't know why we're doing what we're doing, you know, it's not going to be meaningful, and it's not going to align with the mission, the university mission. And one more thing, with the survey, could there be a space for people to suggest, like, maybe new LOs? Like, there's a lot of noise around AI and whatnot, and I'm not suggesting we build that in today or any day, but we've had what we have for a while, and, you know, there might be new ones out there there are, you know, that we're not using, or maybe combining some of our existing ones in some way.
No, I think that that's right. And we had tried this prior, when Jean was chairing GLEC as well. We did a similar survey that didn't rank things, but also wasn't, what we found out was it wasn't specific enough, and we were sort of like, should we combine LOs? And everyone was like, yes. Well, which LOs? I don't know, like, that's kind of what we learned from that, right? So yes, that's part of the conversation. To your point about drivers, I think all three of those things that you mentioned, right? An appeal to new students, and to think about, I don't know, I mean, I think I'm in a particular position just based on my field of expertise, right? I mean, one of the things that, what we don't necessarily want is to say gen ed can save our programs, right? But we all know that that's in the back of our heads as well, right? That gen ed is the bread and butter of some of our current
It's in the front of my
programs. Yeah, I mean, me too, right? But thinking about how can we articulate our value of some of those things that aren't necessarily the things that get talked about in higher ed these days, right? The liberal arts, the histories, the humanities, that kind of thing, right? Like, how can we use gen ed to be able to articulate our identity as a university around that particular piece, right? And I think the hope is that, yes, we can, right? So that's one thing. I think the appeal to incoming students with the idea, we talked about this in May, right? Those drivers that employees or employers are looking for, some of those learning outcomes they say that students are lacking, that they want, that can maybe differentiate our students, incorporating some of those in various ways, whether it's in existing courses or new courses, you know, I think that that's a piece. I also think it's just a matter of, like you said, updating, right? And thinking through what is necessary now, not just for employers, right? But what skills do our students lack when they come here and need when they leave here, whether that's as a human being or as an employee, right? And I mean, I think AI is one of those. The other thing to remember too, though, and this is one thing I keep coming back to, and I've been on GLEC for, I don't even know how long, I think since my second year here, before it was a governance committee, right? 10 years, maybe. My God, that's insane. Anyway, maybe I'm mired in this one. But one of the things we've sort of have to remind ourselves continually of, I mean, I'm looking around the room, a lot of you have been on this committee at one point or another, and remind ourselves of is that just because our Gen Ed program doesn't say that that we have this LO is attached to the program, doesn't mean our students are leaving here without that learning outcome. Right? Because we think of Gen Ed as like a big, every student has to do it, right? So it kind of ends up feeling like a catch-all, but remember that they have majors and minors and certificates that also have learning outcomes attached to them. So just because they're not getting AI, I'm not saying we shouldn't do AI, but getting AI in Gen Ed doesn't mean it's not somewhere in their program, that majority of them aren't leaving with it somehow, right? Lou, go ahead.
Just want to follow up on this, the comment about how GLE courses save programs. It almost seemed like it was like a secret thing to say. I don't think it should be so secret. I think that should be front and center, like Frank was saying. This is, like we value our programs, so why not use the resource we have to protect them?
Yep.
So yeah, I don't think this needs to be the dirty little secret in the room. Speaking for a program in which I teach a lot of GLE courses.
Yeah, me too. Lindsay?
The LOs that are created for GLE, I was surprised that we don't have them in our other classes. Like they aren't front and center, like, it seems like those LOs are like, this is what GLE can give you for LOs, but why isn't it, this is what Franklin Pierce can do?
You mean more of like a larger message about what we do?
Yeah, like I would love to see us proactively take that at LO, because I don't teach a lot of GLE. I think there's great learning outcomes that need to happen, but I would love to see that LO be inputted in other courses that are,
Well,
it's a focus.
I mean, we do have in our programs, right? We've identified certain learning outcomes that we emphasize in our programs, like critical reading. If they don't take an English class as a Gen Ed, shake my fist and be like, everybody should have a literature class, but if they don't, if they get out of it, that doesn't mean that they're not getting critical reading in other courses, kind of thing.
Right, and
Yeah.
I just, maybe it would be great if we, and maybe this is down the road, but could map those LOs.
All of
Where
those
else
things.
do we do, like, I know I do critical reading, especially with research stuff in my classes, but I don't ever feel like there's a opportunity to maybe report back on how successful my fourth year students are and stuff that they would have done freshman year that they got reported on.
So the suggestion is mapping GLE LOs alongside major and course LOs.
Yeah, let them
to
spider out
see.
into other courses.
Okay, I think let them spider, I think they are spidered out. I mean, are you suggesting maybe we need to figure out where those spiders are crawling?
Yeah, if we're thinking these LOs are critical, why are we only pertaining them to GLEs?
The other thing I would say, along with that, sorry, but the minute, if we can make, especially when they're major and they're like, oh, you're gonna do critical reading in health sciences, something that makes the critical reading that you're doing in the GLE more credible. And we spend a lot of time trying to explain to people why they should take the GLEs in the first place.
Yeah.
But if we connect it to their major and say, no, you're gonna get the skills you need in an English class that you're gonna use in, anatomy and physiology.
Yeah.
That's something you can tell parents.
Yeah,
Do you
That's
mind
something,
if I add something? I'm
yeah,
new.
please, Lisa.
Paul told me to just shout.
Yeah, please, let's just shout. We're good at shouting.
So
Yeah.
with GLE, why don't we just pair to marketable skills? That's something that's done in other states. And those are things that you have to pair to marketable skills regardless of the program that you're in, regardless of whether or not it's graduate or undergraduate. This is an initiative that's getting pushed. And as far as AI, we could just make it a little more blanket and say it's technology forward.
Yep.
So we have, our students are coming out with the outcome of having certain marketable skills that we can all incorporate. Doesn't have to be individual, but it mirrors. And then in our programs, we've had that in our assessments. But marketable skills is the best thing that we can do to assure that our students are coming out there with communication skills, oral, written, otherwise, research skills. And then we can pare those down with our individual departments and programs, et cetera. And then paring down the learning outcomes. We typically can't do beyond 3, 4 at max for any course. So I'm all for that.
Yeah, sure. No, and I think you're right. And some of those skills that we identified, we're already doing in Gen Ed.
I think
We
need
keep
to
coming back
stop
to-
calling it Gen Ed.
Sorry?
We need to stop calling it gen ed. It's an old term. Just rebrand it. It's still the same things. They're still coming out with the same results.
Oh.
But people hear gen ed and they think of the 70s or 80s.
Well,
They
yeah,
think
and
of
Gen
those
Ed is very
horrible-
much the
those
distribution
horrible
list, right?
classes.
The checkbox list.
Right,
That's
like-
kind of the connotation.
Let's just call it marketable skills
Yeah.
courses or something that's more identifiable to students and parents. That they feel like they're taking something away with it.
I do, yeah, Jenny, I wanna get to Jenny, because Jenny said.
Sorry,
her name.
Jenny.
That's all right.
No, I typed in the text that we could call it something else like expansive learning or mind expanding. I don't know. I do agree that gen ed has a bad connotation to it. I didn't realize it was dated, but it is like something you have to get through. Or like that's kind of the idea that a lot of students have that we don't want them to have. I think somebody might have mentioned this, but I'm not entirely sure. But could we use LO mapping as a way to determine what LOs need to be in gen ed?
Potentially. Good.
You can map them out in a matrix and then set them up in,
My brain.
sorry.
No, that's okay. It's just not the way I think, but there are other people on GLE that can help me do it. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so then you list your marketable skills down one.
Yeah.
And then you list your, your main theme of courses up top, and then that way you're aligning your courses. It's very simple tool, it's elegant, but that way you know that, hey, if they're taking a certain class, they're definitely gonna have that research component in there.
Sure, yeah, look,
I remember the last time we did this, there was discussion of, do we keep track of the LOs that every student takes to make sure that they get every LO that we say that we want to get? And ultimately, we decided that we weren't gonna do that because we did not have the technology to be able to do that. And so I think there was this discussion of the base code, and which I can't even, I guess not worth mentioning. But I wonder if the technology now exists for, to do it in a simple way. And if it does, then maybe that's worth looking into. I don't know.
If I could just,
go ahead.
I mean, Canvas now is set up with rubrics that could be applied at every level of the university, across the whole university, all courses, colleges, programs, and education, of course, has some of you. Like I fill out your rubric for some of my courses with your students that are in my courses. So, yeah, we've got, the technology's much better. I mean, bless Heather Tullio for having come up with something when we didn't have as much, technological breadth. But yeah, it's there.
And to be fair, we actually did do that in GLEC 8 years ago. So then it was when Jed was chairing GLEC, but I think before it was a governance committee. He stepped back and made like a whole, with the registrar's office, we did like a whole spreadsheet that did map how many were graduating with this, how many were graduating with that, how many were graduating with that. What we found was, in general, we were all of the students were hitting all of the LOs that we have identified, which is kind of crazy considering how many that we identified, right? There were a few that were lacking, right? So experiential learning, I think, was one of those that we weren't doing in gen ed, at least, right? I mean, I think a lot of us think about that in terms of internships, right? And I think most majors are doing internships or student teaching or whatever it may be, right? That does exist. What was interesting, I think, and again, this was a million years ago, but what was interesting in our discussions after that happened was the fact that how even it was between the identified programmatic LOs of how many students were hitting them. And it was the vast majority of our students were graduating, having taken at least one course with the identified LOs of the gen ed program. Yeah.
Just to follow up, that's very different than saying you need to do these LOs in order to graduate, which is, I'm not sure if that is where we're going with this, having fewer LOs so that they become graduation requirements, or if it's going to be more this umbrella. We're hoping to get most of them And if we're like in the 80 to 90%, we're good for our assessment.
I think that's where we are now. I
That's
think the
where we are now,
umbrella
yes.
is where we are now.
But are we thinking of making that
I mean-
graduation requirements?
I think that one of the things that we need to consider in this process too is that students and parents don't think in terms of LOs, right, necessarily. They think in terms of, we think in terms of LOs. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm trying not to say that we market it that way. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, that the message we're giving parents and students is that they are graduating, they will get these LOs when they graduate. Not telling the student, you have to make sure you get creative thinking, right? Like, but we tell them that they will get creative thinking. Do you see the difference of what I'm trying to say?
They have the opportunity to get,
That they have the opportunity.
right, but they may not avail themselves of that opportunity,
Mhm.
but,
Yeah.
that's very different than saying,
Well,
in order to get the degree,
and I
you
think
have to have.
this is why we talk about quant and written communication, right? Because they have to get through those, right? Inquiry and analysis, I mean, as long as they take FYI, they will have inquiry and analysis, for example, right? Or information literacy. So we can say every student at Franklin Pierce has information literacy.
Well,
This reaction is appropriate, right?
I mean, that-
We don't
It's great
market it.
because there's
Okay.
no one place to approach this whole thing, there's a lot going on, but Jen, Brown and Lisa brought up pre and post.
Mhm.
All right, so let's say creative thinking is one of the LOs, right? You can have 2 assignments. And then you can easily with Canvas's rubric technology, you do the rubric one time early in the semester, you do it the next time, say, well, this was another creative thinking rubric assignment. You do the same. That part's it's really not all, I don't want to say technologically, it's making up the rubric, it's obviously a little more what it is, but we have it now. It is really good stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And then,
If
and
you were
then
to
we
do
get.
pre and post, I'm not saying do pre, I'm just saying,
No, I
since you
mean,
brought it
but
up.
that gets into conversation, if we're thinking about assessment too, that gets into another piece of this conversation that I don't know that we've talked about much, right? Like, are we talking, actually, I think I have this. Talking about like the preliminary discussion in May, a lot of the smaller groups identified sort of what is it we want students to leave with, right? So the language of things like proficiency, exposure, that kind of stuff came out. So when we do a pre and post, I mean, one of the things to think about is, are we looking for improvement, right? Do we want that score on that rubric to go up?
If you come in strong with the skill, then.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's one of the things to think. I mean, these are all assessment issues, right? But, and I think some of that language, like, that's going to hopefully emerge as we think about what our mission statement is for Gen Ed, what our identity is as a Gen Ed program, what our identity. I don't mean to like overinflate this, but I do think that this has implications for identity as a university, not just our Gen Ed program, right? The academics at Franklin Pierce University, I think that this can drive a conversation about who we are now, right? Yeah, Paul.
And maybe I'm stealing the provost's thunder here, but I know one thing that I've learned in the last week or so is that President Eden is very interested in emphasizing the career readiness angle. And I think, I would just think we should keep that in mind as we're early in the process here. That's correct, right, Catherine?
Yep, absolutely.
I also don't think it's our job it's impossible to measure improvement, doing pre and post. And I think that with assessment, that's getting a little, that would be
Granular.
difficult to do.
Yeah.
It's what programs, when you're assessing programs, you're looking at vertical alignment between and I'm preaching to the choir and I understand that, so I apologize. But you're looking for your alignment in your assessment so that it reflects your program's progress. You're not looking for perfection, you're looking for improvement over time.
Yeah.
And so if they hit the mark, they hit the mark, and then you get to be the hero in it.
You get to say, look, we did it, right?
And then you can take that, and then that's where you can correlate it to project out for the next year and how you're going to distribute funds and what you're gonna be doing.
Sure.
I'll just, I mean, chiming in with Paul, I mean, it's wonderful that the president also has that same focus, but that's what the parents all have as a focus when the kids come. That's all the kids want, is to be ready. They all want hands-on skills. Like, they all want to be able to, if they chose their sophomore year to leave and never go back to college, they want skills that they could implement into their current workforce.
Right, and then the reason I brought it up is, I mean, we've always had that,
Mhm.
right? Career preparation, every school does, whether they want to admit it or not. But what I'm saying is, and I probably didn't state it as clearly as I should have, is that there's an even greater
Oh, yeah.
emphasis on this, for example, more so perhaps than under President Mooney.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think that's right, and Catherine and I have talked about this too, like, I don't know that we even do a good job of articulating where those things are even in our majors. I mean, just from anecdotally, I know that you all are doing those things in your classes. But I don't know that we have anywhere, any like one-stop shop to say, look at all we're doing to prepare our students for career, right? Or those specific skills. We also, I mean, then you insert those soft skills in there as well, right, that we talk about over and over and over again. So, yeah, good conversation so far. These are just some highlights of some of those conversations, things that came out of those workshops, and then I'm gonna show you some things that have emerged from the background reading that I've done. One is, I can't emphasize this enough, it's article after article after article right now about how the perception of higher ed has changed just in general, right? And that the confidence in higher ed has gone drastically down just in the last 10 years about its usefulness, those kinds of things. So these are definitely things we want to think about. How do we show that we create return on investment? Right, that we create ROI, and some of that is the skills and career-based courses. Emerging trend to return to the purposeful college experience in reaction to that trend, which has really, built up a lot of steam over the last 2 or 3 years. There are starting to be some people coming back and saying, wait a minute, we're missing the piece of college here that we, one of the people point to the divisiveness in our current divisiveness in American culture, right? And that some of that is because we're not focused on those softer kind of skills, the creative thinkings, the critical thinkings, that kind of thing, that, that's what's missing. And because higher ed has focused on the career stuff, students aren't necessarily leaving with the same kind of expansive, I think Jenny used the word expansive learning, right? That expanded, the emphasis on like an expanded worldview, right? Or understanding larger concepts has kind of gone away. And some people are starting to advocate for that to be imbued back into things. The diversification of skills as well, so that it's not that we're asking, majors aren't enough anymore is kind of the emerging idea that's coming out of this, right? That you can come out with a major, but that you need things to bolster that major. And I think gen ed is obviously poised to be part of that conversation. The other thing is that in some of the reading that I've done about how to approach a reform process, right? Or how to create a gen ed program that is appropriate for your institution is to understand and articulate your strengths as an institution, right? Student connections with faculty is another thing that is showing up in the research, that gen ed programs tend to be students get surprised by the connections that they make with their faculty within gen ed, right? And I think that here, part of that connection, one of the things that we've focused on in FYI is that, right? But I think that that's part of all of our courses. We talk about this constantly, that this is our strength at Franklin Pierce, right? And that this is the time of transition at a university, which clearly we are in right now with a new president coming in, is an opportunity for gen ed reform as well. That we're sort of kind of more open at this point than we may have been before. The other thing over and over and over again, and I did say this in May, just don't reinvent the wheel, right? Like, don't just hit reset and erase everything that you've done before, right? Yeah, some of this is repackaging, some of this is thinking about what are we doing and how do we articulate it, that kind of thing, right? Or how do we shift things around that we're already doing that may work. Okay, so some of the things that emerged for me from the May workshop, sorry, I'm starting to hustle because we're almost done, was that we really want some faculty involvement in the process. I plan to do that. We also, I talked about this a little bit, some of the identified goals of Gen Ed program that came through that resonated with me were exposure, right? We want students to be exposed to new ideas, new ways of thinking, that kind of thing. We want them to be proficient in certain skills, right? I don't want them just to be exposed to critical reading in a literature class. I want them to be proficient in critical reading. That would be, if they would read, that would help, but I don't know, that's just me. The culture of curiosity was one thing that emerged as well, right? That one of the things we would love in a Gen Ed program is to promote intellectual curiosity, which I think a lot of us could agree is not necessarily part of our culture currently, right? With our students anyway, yeah.
Did you, at that May workshop, remember I came up with an acronym career?
I have it somewhere.
Is
Is it not in the notes?
Maybe it is.
It could be it's probably in the
It
notes.
was for like, what could be the name of the Gen Ed
Yep,
program. I forgot what
it's in the notes somewhere, I'm
it had
pretty sure.
Layman's in it, it had something else.
If it's not in the notes, it's in this notebook.
It was like C stood for something, A stood for something.
Yeah.
If I didn't transcribe it, Frank, it's in this
I
notebook.
worked like 30 minutes on it.
No, I know, it's in here, I promise, it's in here. And the liberal art, that we are a liberal arts institution and that is our foundation and that is our history and that is something that a lot of people expressed a desire to continue and to emphasize in this process. And also, again and again and again, the employment market alignment, right? Alignment with those skills that employers say that they need. So some of the ideas that have emerged, both in GLE, the committee in semesters prior, and also just for my reading and thinking this semester, is we need a focus for our program. We need to define what it is and why we do it, right? So when I think that starts, for me, that starts with our LOs, and then we can work out from there. So the plan is that once I get feedback from you all on that, I draft and work with LEC to come up with something, and that will be then sent to you all for your approval as well, right? And that would be sort of an adoption of a mission statement as well. Another thing that has emerged is the consideration of the role of DEI, or at least sort of cultural competency within Gen Ed. We do have cultural awareness as one of our identified learning outcomes currently. There is obviously there's some institutions have requirements that students have to take a class that's sort of coded diversity. We have those courses, some of those exist now, right? Is it something we want to do, that we want to have students leaving here saying that they have taken a class that meets those requirements? Or not? How might we incorporate this? Could we just code what we currently have? Does it need to be a new course? Whatever that might be. LinkedIn learning opportunities, and again, that's just something I worked on. You can see that page for suggestions there. Okay, so these are more specific ideas. And again, this might sound familiar to those of you who have been in GLE or the GLE committee. But one is this idea of GLE pathways or minors, meaning that, again, minors, as Brian is doing them, I do not think is viable for us. I do not think kind of cross-college minors satisfy everything we want to for a Gen Ed program, right? But I do think there may be opportunities for coming up with different pathways, whether they be optional or required, right? Pathways where you could focus your Gen Ed, right? So again, and I just keep coming back to this because it was the easiest one to do, right? It's, let's say we have a path that is diversity, equity, and inclusion within Gen Ed, right? So that outside those foundational courses, the math, and the written communication, right? That your courses in Gen Ed would be focused on that theme, right? And then these could be various themes, like sustainability is one you see a lot at different universities as well. I mean, I don't know, if we have those courses currently, but it's something to think about. Do we want to offer an option that is, it's not really a credential on their transcript, but it is something that they can say to employers, your company values cultural awareness. I focused my Gen Ed courses in diversity, equity, and inclusion, or whatever that might be, right?
Jenny's raised her hand.
Yeah.
Jenny,
With the GLE pathways or minors, do prospective employers get to see badges? Like, could we go back to badging as a way to do this? And I just thought of that based on what you just said, but I was wondering about the one credit courses. So I wanted to ask about that, but I realize you haven't gotten there yet.
yeah. Well, let me talk about them. Again, these are just ideas, so please, I'm throwing my hands up here. So the GLE pathways, the badging, yes, I mean, it could be something we could think about. I don't really know how that works. It can also be a way that we teach students within our career education learning outcomes to talk about their pathway, right? Like whether or not it's a badge on their transcript is one thing, but whether or not we teach them how to talk it up is another thing, right? So that's one thing. The one credit skills focused courses, again, I'm calling them ING courses, but I have no idea what ING stands for right now. Because the idea was like colleging, which would be kind of, again, this is my ideal world. Please don't think this is going to happen or this is whatever. Like this is just an idea. But where we take FYI and we make the 3 credit FYI the academic introduction to intellectual inquiry, the focus, and we yank out the extended orientation piece into 1 credit where they learn to do college, right? Where it would be driven a lot more by peer leaders potentially, that kind of thing, right? Maybe the second year, the students take something called adulting, right? Financial literacy, credit cards, mortgages, insurance, things like that, where they're learning the life skills that people claim they do not learn in college, right? And then the last is very kind of nebulous. I could see 2 scenarios here. I could see a 1 credit course in each year, junior and senior year. I could also see the 3 credit or 1 credit course, just 3 of those, right? This could take various forms. 1 could be a DEI form, right? 1 could be the form of an experiential learning piece where they have to satisfy experiential learning by studying abroad, by doing something else. It could be project-based by, like, I keep coming back to WPI, right? Where students are working together in a course to solve a problem, potentially even a campus problem, right? By the time they're seniors, they know what to complain about here. I don't know if you've noticed that, right? It's like seniors, they're like, this is blah, 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 right? And they start complaining. If we give them the opportunity to work on those problems themselves, that might be something to think about, right? Currently, the way I'm thinking about this is this would be in addition to what they're doing now. Now, I want to put a caveat on that and remind you that our current course credit number is on the low middling side of our competitors for how many credits they take in Gen Ed. So adding these would not necessarily be devastating to when they graduate, kind of thing. But it's this, again, this is just something that I'm playing with and that has emerged as an idea.
I don't know if you want to read any of this stuff that's up on.
I don't know if we have time. Can you, I mean, I do want to read it.
Do you want to read Doug's out loud? So.
I mean, Doug just says in terms of, I just want to give the.
Go ahead, yeah.
They put in terms of drivers for Gen Ed reform in our academic mission, let's keep in mind that historically there have been 3 purposes of higher ed: serving the economy in terms of training people for jobs society needs on the one hand, and giving students marketable skills that help them to be successful, meaningful careers. 2, serving our democracy by helping students with their civic literacy and readiness to participate in political and community affairs. And 3, the personal growth and development of students as human beings. Number 2 has been one of FPU's goals in the past, but seems to have been lost in recent years. Seems important given the times and troubles we face in our society today. Donna mentioned that being able and willing to read and think critically is a waning skill. We're seeing the results in larger culture, and I think Jen said she agreed. And Catherine, is that the bottom? Yeah, we have a climate action certificate similar to the old sustainability certificate.
I mean, that's the thing, pathways could be similar to certificates, not necessarily certificates, but similar to them. Yeah.
When we met yesterday to talk about that book, I think a really awesome idea came out about having a community-wide opportunity to engage in some critical discussions and thinking. And I know it was tossed out, like, maybe there is a 1 credit that's given every year, you know, to read a book. And then the college creates forums to either, you know, all actively discuss, or maybe the author comes in and we can listen to a talk. I would love to see us engage in stuff that more brings us all together as a whole, but also brings different disciplines or people in the same room that are from different walks of life. So I think that would be a great opportunity. I'm not, like you said, it's a thought about the colleging and the adulting, but maybe some of those pieces can get tied to this.
Yeah.
Because I'm not sure like how deep a peer leader could go to make it 1 credit. But if they had 1 credit that was tied to their skills in colleging, but it was also, let's all read
Tied
this
to
book about
moderating
whatever
discussion.
that random book is. And so,
100%.
anyways.
No, I think that that's true too. There, see, but I did ask for an hour and a half, by the way, and I was only given 50 minutes. But John, go ahead.
There was an institution that I worked at before where all the freshmen coming in were given a certain
Big
book.
league. Yeah.
And then in their first year seminar, it was a discussion from day 1 throughout that term. And then they had the author of the book come in and speak at some point as well.
And we've done that in the past, actually, with INC, before I was here. But yeah. Lou.
I want to circle back to something you said at the beginning about a consensus for change. And I wonder if you could speak to why you think there's a consensus. I'm not saying whether there is or there isn't. And also to sort of say, you know, with big things like this, you know, consensus building from this point forward is probably part of what you need to be doing as well too, as part of making sure we're all on the same page. It seems like there's some consensus here, but you know, has Senate had any input on this? Is it just from GLEC? Have you talked to student groups?
No, but
if you could speak.
what a good segue. Next steps, right? So the next steps I have on my radar I would like to do student focus groups this semester. I have said that from the beginning. I don't know if I'm opening myself up for havoc with that, but I do think that the student voice matters. And but you know, one of the things that came out of GLEC years ago, you know how we code our courses with HM, SS, NS, our gen ed courses? That was a student idea. That was our student rep on GLEC that came up with that. And I think it was an amazing idea. So anyway, that voice I think is super important here. In terms of consensus, you know, this is just from people grabbing me and telling me, are we changing these things? Because we need to, right? It's also, I'm just gonna point out in the last 3 semesters, there has not been 1 GLE proposal that has come through GLEC, not 1. So the idea is stagnation, right? Like we're not thinking about developing new things in our current program. In general, it's just not happening. So I think that to me indicates a potential time for let's step back and rethink. I mean, this is not something that GLEC came up with. This was also something that the provost office had asked us to look into. And I do think, and I can't speak to.
Yeah, I did ask GLEC and then put together the you know, the role that Jess is in, and it's been 12 years. We have to refresh. As you guys are indicating, the students change, demand changes. The other thing is that, quite honestly, I don't think that we don't have the tools to speak as effectively as we could about what we impart upon undergraduate students at Franklin Pierce. I think that, and so gen ed reform is a way to get at that. Like, how do we talk about an undergraduate education at Franklin Pierce to incoming and potential parents and students in a way that's really meaningful for what they're looking for now. So that's also kind of why I asked for the conversation to get started.
And the conversation was also about like, could this be a differentiator for us? You know, whether it's a brand new branded program or just a better way of talking about what we're already doing, right? Go ahead.
I have a question. One of your bullet points was talking about creating curiosity in the students. And I know Tom is always talking about, and he does get his students to get very curious about subjects. I would love to know what other people, if there's some kind of a survey or some kind of something, what do people feel you can do to make students more curious? That's what I would like to know. Especially in other divisions, you know.
We should have like a repository
Jenny Brown.
where people can just go in and post.
Yeah.
Sounds like a center for teaching and learning. Yeah.
I guess a follow-up to the consensus question. What kind of mandate do you think you have for change? Are you looking at like small, medium, or large change in terms of like where you are right now?
I do not think that necessarily our distribution requirements will change. I do not think the distribution requirements will be at the forefront of what it is we say we do. Do you see what I'm saying? I don't see this as an entirely new gen ed with 27 new courses that our students are required to take. I see this as looking at what we already do, thinking about what can enhance it, and thinking about maybe what doesn't work anymore and taking it out, right? So medium, I would say, low to medium would be my barometer right now. That's me.
Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead. I know we're technically over time. I don't know how y'all feel about that, but.
You got 2 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought it was to 50.
Jenny, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I think Colleen, if I understand, if I can hear the voices correctly, mentioned curiosity. And I've read a lot about that lately, you know, being the parent of a child who's going through public school. And some of the things that I've read about is autonomy, like, and self-direction. So students having more choice and more kind of direction in what types of things they pursue and they learn about. And so two of the things I'm thinking in terms of helping students create more curiosity is to let them have more freedom in their GLE or their gen ed choices. And I'm thinking too, like from an individual class situation too, is maybe having them, and I think some of us may already do this, but having them relate the content to something that they're interested in or their future career, like having autonomy and self-direction in that way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Added something about LO, there are too many LOs, I think.
Yeah, given that, the mapping LOs was
If
different.
you remember, I mean, I have all the emails from Carrie McKeever and Glenn, Jerk, and all the Jerk.
Yeah.
The thing that's, remember, LEAP was what Carrie, a blessed memory, what Carrie was hoping we could do, all of that. She really wanted that, and then when all the divisions, when we had the divisions pick their embedded LOs under the KNUs, then whatever was left out were called the orphans, but then what Carrie, a blessed memory, when it was, don't call them orphans, I forgot what she called them, and then we put them in the catalog. So, I mean, you know, it's just a thing that.
It's just a lot. It's a lot. So, go ahead, Tom.
Yes, I think that's really worth remembering and focusing on, and maybe even bringing up at our next collect meeting, is how to give students more autonomy.
Autonomy, yeah.
With
The
their-
choice, the path, this is one of the things I was thinking about with pathways. It's like sort of masked choice in a way, right? Like,
Guided.
yeah, guided choice.
Yep.
Yeah,
like-
yeah, guided choice.
Was that spring workshops when Derek was talking about that they get overloaded by choice?
Yes,
That's
so there's too much.
So there's too much, so there's.
So some of them want the map, right?
They do, and so the guided map, like here's a suggestion, but
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be,
Yeah, yeah.
taking a little bit out of it would.
Good, yes, I like it. Okay, quickly. These are some things that I'm planning. This idea of this white paper, it's more of like a report of stuff, right? I plan to circulate to faculty around October. I'm gonna ask for time at your college meetings to talk about that piece and think about what the potential proposals will be in there. GLEC will flesh out some of these emerging ideas, think about what we think comes to the top, and what other people, right? Like I said, with the student groups, I should have written that one on here. If you want, I was thinking brown bag discussions, just some kind of times throughout the semester where you all can come if you're thinking about these things and dump a bunch of ideas on me. I don't know, we'll try it and see if anybody shows up. And then obviously I'd like to vote on proposed changes very ambitiously in December, probably maybe January when we get back, thinking about proposed changes and then thinking about implementation in the spring, about what that might look like. Okay? Thoughts, questions, ideas? Thank you for all of your input. Yeah.
Would the vote be a Senate vote or a full faculty vote?
I think a full faculty vote.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Full faculty.
Yeah, it has to be full faculty. And we talked about maybe even bringing faculty into a room, like when that vote comes up. We'll see what that is. Okay, thank you, everybody.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so